Will you pray with me? O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Many decades ago, when I was in college, I worked at a summer camp called Quidnunc, which I think roughly in Latin translates to why now or what's next, something like that. What's next? Which is sort of the theme for today. We are winding down the liturgical year. We've only got a couple more Sundays coming up to the end till we start all over again. But as we come to the end, we begin to think about what next? And then this is the first Sunday of November, which sometimes is celebrated as All Saints Sunday, since this past week on the 1st was technically All Saints Day, comes right after Halloween. It's why we have Halloween, All Saints Day, a time to remember those who have departed. Then there are other things I think on our mind this week that might make us ask, what's next? Seems to me there's an election on Tuesday, and I think most of us are wondering, what's next? What will the outcome of this be? I think a lot of folks in our nation are feeling a bit insecure about that result. No matter who you are, people are feeling insecure. Somebody's going to be happy and some folks are not going to be happy after that. What's next? And I think there's grave concern about the state of our nation. What's next? That's what the Pharisees are asking. They're asking about what's next. They're asking a question about resurrection and wanting some kind of assurance from Jesus about all of that. And then the people of Thessalonica are asking Paul about, well, what do we do now? And is Jesus coming again? And what's going to be happening while we wait? What now? What now? Is what they're really saying to Paul. And then there's Job, whose life is just in the pits, big time in the pits, wondering what's going to happen next. But I like Job in the middle of the pits, wondering what could possibly happen to him next. And what does Job say? He proclaims, I know that my Redeemer lives. He proclaims the good news. He proclaims the good news for what's next, that no matter what, he knows his Redeemer lives. I have been privileged as a psychologist when I worked in a hospital for the chronically ill and the disabled, and in my life as a pastor, to be with many, many people at the end of life, asking the questions, what's next? And it is a privilege to be there in that moment. At that moment between breath and heartbeat, in silence. And it is in a blink. And I've also heard many stories from people about being visited by the dear departed, the ghosts, unexplained phenomenon, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences. And I've had my own profound experiences of the something more. I've had my own experiences in thin places, which helped me to answer the questions about what's next. I also realized that I have proclaimed the what's next long before I was a pastor. I proclaimed it because I sang it. And that really touched my heart and thin places like nothing else. I don't know about Nancy's experiences with singing, but long before I was a pastor, I had to sing from them Handel's Messiah. I know that my Redeemer liveth. And I came to realize when I sang that I sang it because somewhere deep inside me, I knew that. It wasn't just notes on a page. I had come to truly know that. And a little later on, Handel uses some wonderful words out of Romans. If God be for us, who can be against us? An amazing passage out of Romans talking about the fact that God never, ever, ever leaves us, not in this life or in the next. And I can't sing those words and do all that coloratura stuff up there without knowing it, because I got to sing it from the tips of my toes, that I know it. I know it. That I have no doubts. And you'd be amazed at how many clergy have an awful lot of doubts. Not that doubts are bad. We all do sometimes have doubts, but an awful lot of them do. I have a dear friend. I've been thinking about this a lot this week because last Sunday night I got a phone call from a dear friend of mine who is a UCC or was a UCC pastor, and found out that she has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And you all probably know what that means. As she said, this will be my last Christmas. And we talked a little on the phone, and she's suddenly talking to me about, well, I don't really know what I believe about God. There's nothing like having to preach it to other people or sit at the bedside and talk about it to help you get to know something about God. At that moment between here and the love of God. It's powerful. It's absolutely powerful. Before I went to Nebraska, I cared for a dear friend of mine for the last year of her life because there was nobody else to do it. And she died in my living room. She was not a believer at all. Borrowed my faith, as we say, during that time in her life. And I will swear to you that after she passed that morning, I heard her voice as clear as day say, "It's more beautiful than you ever told me." Now, some could say I was just imagining that. I don't know. But I felt like she visited me many, many times thereafter. And the love that one can feel for anybody in that moment of passing, the intimacy of being there in that moment convinces me that nothing ever separates us from the love of God. Not even in death. And that is true in the trials and tribulations of life right now. There's some verses I left out of the reading in Thessalonians this morning because it goes on and on about trials and tribulations and all kinds of other things that I think get us a little off track, but it is in there. No matter what comes this week, God will be with us. And if we hold fast to what we know about God and the love of Jesus Christ, no matter what happens with an election, God will walk with us. Partly what Paul is also telling us in his letter. You know, he tells the people in Thessalonica that God has loved them from the beginning and picked them out and goes with them. And no matter what, Paul goes on to say, you must do all the things continue living in all the ways you've been taught, which basically means you continue to love each other and care for each other. You practice justice and kindness and mercy. You go the second mile and turn the other cheek. And while you're doing that, God goes with you. And no matter what happens, God will be with you. And it will be ultimately okay. So what's next? I don't know exactly what's next. I can't paint you a picture of some heaven. But I have no doubt that God is with you, that there is more than all of us in this universe, more than all those stars and all those things we can see in those new fancy telescopes. There is more. And we are part of that more. And that more will never, ever let us go. And I don't need to know how the more works all that out, because the more is so much more than I am. But I know that whatever is next, the more is there. And the more loves us and cares for us and is with us always. Amen. And let's prepare ourselves for communion with let us break